There was a time when the Mongols seemed invincible. City after city burned, kingdoms collapsed, and entire civilizations trembled. But in 1260, on the plains of Ain Jalut, something happened that stunned the world. The Mongols were stopped. What happens when the world's most feared warriors, the Mongols, finally meet their match? Present the central mystery. How did a smaller Mamluk army defeat the Mongols? And why was this battle a turning point in history? Imagine a force that sweeps across the world like a storm, leaving nothing but ash, ruins, and silence in its path. That was the Mongols. Born on the cold steppes of Mongolia under Genghis Khan in the early 13th century, the Mongols were not just warriors. They were masters of speed, strategy, and terror. They built the largest continuous land empire in human history, stretching from China to Eastern Europe in just a few decades. Kingdoms that had stood for centuries collapsed in weeks. Cities that once glowed with trade and culture were reduced to dust. By the mid-12th century, after Genghis Khan's death, his successors carried on his vision of conquest. One of the most feared among them was Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. Hulagu marched westward with an enormous army, determined to bring the entire Islamic world under Mongol rule. In 1258, the Mongols unleashed one of the most shocking events in Islamic history: the sack of Baghdad. Baghdad was not just a city. It was the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, a center of science, learning, and culture. For centuries, it had been the jewel of the Muslim world. But when the Mongols arrived, it fell in just days. The caliph was executed, scholars were slaughtered, and libraries, holding centuries of human knowledge, were thrown into the Tigris River. Eyewitnesses say the river ran black with ink and red with blood. With Baghdad gone, the Muslim world was left stunned and leaderless. Hulagu didn't stop there. His armies pushed further into the Middle East, taking Syria and crushing every army that stood in their way. City after city surrendered or was destroyed.
While the Mongol storm raged across Asia and the Middle East, in Egypt, a different kind of power was rising. They were not kings born in palaces, nor nobles with ancient bloodlines. They were slaves, warriors taken as boys, trained in the art of war, and molded into an elite military class. They were the Mamluks. The word Mamluk literally means owned. These young boys, mostly of Turkic and Circassian origin, were brought from the steppes and Caucasus, sold into slavery, and then trained with one purpose: to fight. They grew up with no families, no ties except loyalty to their commanders, and a culture that valued discipline, skill, and brotherhood above everything. Out of this brutal system came some of the finest cavalry the world had ever seen. By the mid-12th century, Egypt was ruled by the Ayyubid dynasty, the descendants of the great Salahuddin, Saladin. But the Ayyubids were weak, plagued by infighting and corruption. The Mamluks, once just soldiers, began to realize their own strength. In 1250, they seized power, overthrowing the Ayyubid rulers, and established the Mamluk Sultanate. This was no ordinary dynasty. Egypt was now ruled by former slaves who had clawed their way to the throne through sheer military might. At the head of Egypt during the Mongol threat stood Sultan Saif ad-Din Qutuz. He was a man hardened by exile and betrayal, a leader forged in fire. But even Qutuz knew that he couldn't face the Mongols alone. For this, he turned to another Mamluk warrior, Baybars, a brilliant general known for his cunning, his fierce loyalty to Islam, and his unmatched skill in battle. It was a desperate gamble. Egypt stood as the last great Muslim stronghold. If Cairo fell, the Mongols would dominate the entire Middle East. Then came the Mongol message:
a chilling ultimatum from Hulagu Khan: submit or face the fate of Baghdad. But Qutuz did the unthinkable. He captured the Mongol envoys and executed them, hanging their severed heads on the gates of Cairo. It was a declaration of defiance the world had not dared to make.
Qutuz knew what was at stake. Egypt could not wait behind its walls and hope for safety. To defeat the Mongols, he would have to march north and meet them in open battle. But he also knew that force alone would not be enough. He needed genius. And so, he brought back Baybars, the brilliant tactician whose strategies were as sharp as his sword. The Mamluk army gathered in Cairo and began its march across the Sinai, then into Palestine. Every step was heavy with tension, every soldier knowing they faced the deadliest warriors of their age. Along the way, Qutuz sought an uneasy truce with the Crusader states still holding territory in the Levant. The Crusaders, wary of the Mongols, allowed the Mamluks to pass. By early September 1260, the two armies faced each other in the fertile valley of Jezreel, near a place called Ain Jalut, the spring of Goliath. The name was fitting. Just as David once struck down a giant, the Mamluks were about to face a giant of their own. The stage was set for one of the most decisive battles in history. September 3rd, 1260. The valley of Jezreel was silent, broken only by the sound of hooves and armor. The Mongols, under General Kitpuka, faced the Mamluks of Egypt, led by Sultan Qutuz and his brilliant commander Baybars. Both armies knew this was no ordinary clash. The fate of the Middle East hung in the balance. Baybars, ever the strategist, devised a daring plan. He placed a portion of the Mamluk cavalry at the front and ordered them to attack first. The Mongols, confident from countless victories, responded with their usual ferocity. But as the Mamluks engaged, Baybars ordered a feigned retreat. Dust rose as the Mamluks fell back, pretending to flee in panic. Kitpuka took the bait. Believing victory was already his, he unleashed the full force of the Mongol cavalry in pursuit. But instead of a collapsing enemy, the Mongols found themselves lured into a narrow valley, where the rest of the Mamluk army lay in wait. In an instant, the trap closed. Hidden Mamluk forces surged forward, striking from the flanks. Arrows darkened the sky, swords clashed, and the valley thundered with the cries of war. Still, the Mongols fought with ferocity. The battle raged, neither side yielding. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sultan Qutuz, seeing his men falter, threw off his helmet, raised his sword, and charged into battle, shouting, "O Islam! O Islam!" His cry reignited the Mamluks. They surged with renewed fury, pushing the Mongols back. By the end of the day, the impossible had happened. The Mongols, undefeated for decades, were crushed. Kitpuka himself was captured and executed. For the first time in history, the Mongol tide had been stopped.
The Battle of Ain Jalut was more than just a military clash. It was a turning point in world history. Its consequences rippled far beyond the battlefield.
For the Mongols, the defeat was a devastating shock. Their aura of invincibility had been broken. No longer were they seen as the unstoppable force that crushed everything in their path. Though they would continue to raid and fight, the Mongols would never again advance as far west into the Islamic world. The Battle of Ain Jalut was more than a clash of armies. It was a clash of destinies. On one side, the Mongols, a storm that had consumed half the world. On the other, the Mamluks, once slaves, now the shield of a civilization. Against all odds, the Mamluks stood victorious, proving that even the greatest empire could fall. History often turns on single moments, and Ain Jalut was one of them. Without it, the world we know today might not exist. It was the day the unstoppable force finally met its immovable wall.
Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this.